Afternoon, everybody. It's time at the waterhole time again. I shall be with you for the next 2 hours. My name is Ben Coley, and we have started off the afternoon in Tenby Elephant Park, where unexpectedly we are viewing a couple of beautiful bull elephants having a little scuffle around in the mud there. But I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you all as usual. So remember, it's live and interactive. You can watch on YouTube and on our app. And please do send in your questions and your comments and anything else you'd like to know. And as always, I will do my absolute best to answer any questions that come through. Very posing elephant, this one at the front, standing there with his ears wide spread. Investigating something in the soil there. We ended the show yesterday with a couple of completely sedentary elephants that weren't moving a muscle, who were definitely having a little bit of a doze. These ones a little bit more active. But before we get too in depth, let's head over and check out the weather for today. Okay, so there we go. Another beautiful winter's day in the majority of South Africa. Temperatures ranging from low to high 20s, which is nice, avoiding that very oppressive summer heat and humidity. So these elephants just having a very quiet time of it, not having a full-on sleep. I was asked yesterday whether any other animals sleep standing up, and that one stumped me a little bit because we were discussing how elephants certainly can do. And just for interest's sake, I did do a little bit of research on animal sleep last night before I got my own. And it seems that horses and giraffe have also been recorded sleeping standing up. So I forget who it was who asked me that question, but there you go. I'm sure there are some others as well, but definitely out here in the bush, the giraffe can also sleep standing up, but will also lie down at night time and take 40 winks here and there. Generally speaking, the larger animals don't need so much sleep as smaller ones, probably because their metabolism is motoring so hard to keep them going. And then things like the predators that don't have to worry about being preyed upon themselves and eating a very, very rich nutritional diet of protein and spend hours and hours a day sleeping. Elephant, of course, can't afford to do that because of its rather poor digestive efficiency. It needs to keep piling food into that massive stomach. I always say it needs enough petrol to keep that big V8 or V12, probably in this case, engine running. Also discovered that the creature that sleeps the most, apparently, is a koala. Can sleep 22 hours a day. Now, there's a life we would probably all rather like to have. Really, yes, baby mammals and baby animals in general do require a lot more sleep than fully grown animals. They're spending an awful lot of time and effort into growing, and that is, will need to rest a lot more. Since we are looking at elephants, it's very normal to see young elephants lying down far more often than you will see adults lie down. Although, as we said yesterday, they do lie down. They'll say get a couple of hours of sleep during the day, often just by locking the legs and dozing with their eyes all sort of droopy and their trunk very much relaxed onto the ground. But say they will often lie down properly. But also with elephants, they can't do it, the adults, for a prolonged period of time, just because that their respiration system works. So we can lie pretty much in any position and still breathe because we have a diaphragm that moves independently from our ribs, and that's sort of the bellows that pump the air in and out of our lungs. That's an unconscious decision that we do that. Elephants lack a diaphragm, so for them to actually inhale and take in a breath, they have to physically sort of expand their rib cage in order to pull that air into the lungs. And if they're lying on their side for too long, it becomes far too much pressure on one of those lungs. It could lead to a lack of oxygen, potentially a collapsed lung. It's one of the reasons when you're darting elephants, it's quite important to ensure that it is lying correctly if it's going to be there for a prolonged period of time. But we often see young animals lying down, and say migratory species have to do a little bit of waiting for the youngsters and consider their movements so that things don't get left behind. But those more precocial animals, particularly the antelopes and definitely things like buffalo and wildebeest, those calves, whilst they still do need to rest more than the adults, are incredibly active. It's one of nature's miracles that a young calf, you know, barely more than a fetus, to be honest, it's just popped out. And in wildebeest, within 5 minutes, that animal is up, stumbling around, and able to move with the herd, which of course is a really good predatory or anti-predatory defense, so that you can move away from potential danger. So we get two types of babies in the animal kingdom. Really, we have what are called altricial young and what are called precocial young. So you've probably heard of the term precocious, meaning quite energetic and often getting into trouble and being a little bit more active. So those animals that come out very well developed, so elephants is an example of that. The impala you can see in the background, those are all precocial babies. They have a much longer gestation period because there's more development happening inside the womb. And when they do finally pop out, they are very well developed muscularly and skeletally and able to stand and operate on their own very, very quickly. We also see that in ground nesting birds, things like the lapwings and the guinea fowls and the franklins, spur fowls. Those chicks are pretty much able to wander around independently if they need to, pretty much from day one. Altricial young, shorter gestation period, but need a much more parental care. They're fairly useless when they come out, usually got eyes closed, their muscles don't work properly, often not covered in their proper fur or feathers, and spend a lot more time being reliant upon the parents. You also generally get more altricial young at a time, again, because of the space required in the womb and the less amount of development that is happening there, there is space for more of them. So lions, dogs, cats in general, ourselves, and then a lot of the passerine birds, a lot of the tree nesting birds have precocial young that need a lot more parental help. And so then there are humans where we are never really beyond altricial. We do tend to still rely on our parents long into our lives. Most animals, once maturity is reached, it's time to go out on your own. But we do have a tendency to hang around in many cases. I see the way these elephants are rocking from side to side. I see, Calvin, you're asking how do elephants manage that enormous weight if they are going to sleep standing up? And I should also add, sorry, that because horses I mentioned sleep standing up, but so can zebras as well. You often see zebras in that very sort of relaxed state, and they will also have a little bit of a semi-standing snooze. That's a little alliteration. But if you look at the sort of physiological structure of these animals, it's kind of like four table legs, really. The legs are positioned under the bulk of the elephant. Yes, they've got a slightly heavier head, but there is more than enough ballast in the back half of them to keep them stable. So these animals have the ability to lock their knees, basically. It's not a conscious decision to do it, and they can just support their weight and actively sleep, basically. So it's just all to do with the way their physiology is, the way that they've evolved, designed, whatever word we want to use, just allows them to lock their legs, to lock their knees, and to be able to take that weight without any great stresses or strains. I suppose that's probably the origin of cow tipping. Now I think about it, if not that I've ever seen it or even know if it is actually possible. It's something we hear about a lot. But I suppose if that cow is asleep and has its legs locked, if you can sneak up on it and give it a shove, it may well topple over. Please don't go and try it though. Of course, when we sleep, we have various stages of sleep. The REM, the rapid eye movement state, is considered to be more of a dream state. And there's still a lot of research being done on that as to what the point of it is. A lot of thought that it might be something to do with helping us create memories. But elephants are well known, of course, to have exceptional memories. And they will only sort of fall into REM dream state or REM sleep state about once every 3 or 4 days. And they can only do that whilst lying down. Because when we are in REM state, a lot of our muscles are paralyzed, which is why our eyes are flicking around and there's information, electrical signals going through our brains. But generally speaking, we're not flailing around like madmen. We see it a little bit in dogs. Sure, if you may well have seen your dog have REM sleep, and they do twitch, just like we do sometimes when we twitch. But generally speaking, when you're in REM state, the majority of your muscles are paralyzed to stop you enacting or acting out your dreams. Okay, so of course there are exceptions and issues that occur. That's sort of ultimately the origin of sleepwalking, where that paralysis hasn't quite set in properly. So an elephant can't have REM sleep when he's standing up, otherwise he potentially would fall over because all those muscles in the leg would be, for want of a better word, paralyzed. So it's only when they do lie down and go into a deeper sleep state that they can actually enter that REM state, which is, say, every 3 or 4 days on average that they will have a proper full-blooded deep sleep. They will lie down most evenings, but even then it's not necessarily a full-blooded sleep. So it does seem that this whole idea that REM sleep is necessary for forming memories may not actually be the case. Elephants proving that it's not required on a daily basis, at least. There are some other interesting sleeping strategies, of course, adopted by animals. I mean, well, I should mention that hibernation is not actually sleep. That's a state of sort of deep torpor would be the best way to explain it. So all the bodily functions, the metabolism is massively reduced. Just helps to conserve energy, but it's not true sleep. There's lots of reports of when animals do wake up from hibernation, um, they have to then sleep properly in order to just find that balance in the body. In cases that in sometimes during hibernation, animals will wake up mid-hibernation and then sleep, and then go back into this hibernation state. The other very interesting one, of course, is this. I'm trying to remember exactly how to pronounce it, but the unihemisphere sleep that some aquatic animals go into, like seals, and many birds where one side of the brain is sleeping while the other side is still active. It's a way of resting the brain without completely switching off. We do see that in quite a few bird species, for example, and seals. What's very interesting is that when the left side of the brain is asleep, it's it's the opposite side, which is it's still active then. So if you see an animal sleeping with one eye open, as it were, or a bird, it's the other side of the brain that's asleep. So there's still enough stimuli being picked up by the brain that it is able to, particularly to pick up danger. So there's been research done on things like flocks of ducks that are sleeping in a group. The ducks in the middle will often close both eyes and sleep quite deeply, while the ducks on the peripheries will sleep with their outside facing eye open and just sleep more hemispherically, whatever the word is, so they can be more alert to approaching danger. So these elephants not sleeping. There is some movement. So I'm rather enjoying the rocking. It's rather hypnotic. But I think we'll call this more of a meditative state. You're resting the heavy weight of that trunk. There is an opposite tortoise. We see that in very hot, dry, arid conditions where insects will burrow down, often insects or amphibians, will burrow down into the soil, basically also close off their bodily functions and slow their metabolism right down. But it's not hibernation. It's kind of the opposite. It's what's done to conserve water loss when conditions are particularly bad or it's too hot. But, estivation versus torpor/hibernation. I think I also estivate sometimes when it's particularly hot. We have evolved not to need to do that. We generally have a lot more protective influence around us. And being an apex predator, whether we like it or not, top of the food chain, it's not necessary to stay alert so much. Lovely rhythmical rocking. I seem to be in an alliteration mode today. Yeah, I think we're going to leave these elephants to their pseudo slumbering. Let's head up to Victoria Falls Safari Lodge and see what's happening in Zimbabwe. We're back to the sky camera. I thoroughly enjoyed this yesterday. Beautiful vistas, great expanse of wilderness. You can see a few vultures and marabou stalks down at the bottom there. Of course, this is a sort of a vulture restaurant here. So carcasses are put out for these animals to feed on. Very important that we do try and look after our vulture species. All of them now very much endangered. There's various reasons for that. Habitat loss, the traditional medicine market. There's the idea that vultures have the power of foresight because of the way that they seem to just appear around and in and around things that are dying or dead with no particular warning. People often wondered how these messages were sent. And of course, this gave birth to the idea that they were able to predict death and would follow people around or animals around that were going to succumb to natural or environmental or even unnatural causes. We now know, of course, because birds of prey's eyes are so good, about 8 times better than our own. They're able to see carcasses from very high up. And some vulture species have learned to do things like follow wild dogs due to their very successful hunting strategies. Just from what I can see of these vultures flying, the majority of them look like white-backed vultures, but I'm sure we'll have plenty of hooded down there as well. Every now and again, you can just see in flight, you can see that distinctive white line sort of along their spine, where the name white-backed vulture comes from, obviously. And speaking of how they all seem to just sort of turn up at a carcass, that is pretty much what they use as a following mechanism. It's a beacon, so it just takes one vulture to spot something and descend down to the ground to feed, or at least to investigate. And all the other vultures will notice this happening, and it's thought that they key off that very obvious, excuse me, that very obvious white stripe down their back, and that then attracts multiple birds to the same area. That being said, often when there are kills being made, it's the eagles that turn up first, particularly the bateleurs and the tawny eagles. They are well known for their abilities to locate carcasses, and it is thought a lot of the time the vultures are watching the eagles, who are watching the ground. So they're also looking from one another and working together as a unit. Looks like we might have a lappet faced right in the middle there. Difficult to explain, but got the sort of in between the two marabou stalks. Looks like a slightly larger one of those three vultures in the middle. In between the stalks, the one in the middle looks like it could be a lappet faced or a white-headed vulture at least. Looks like it has a slightly different jizz, that general impression of shape and size. It's grooming at the moment. Maybe I'm mistaken. Put your head up. Let's have a look. See a couple of hooded vultures either side of the stalk in the foreground. Much smaller bird, much smaller beak as well. Maybe not. Maybe they are all white-backed. I'm still not quite sure. So those hooded vultures, bottom of the pecking order amongst the vulture species, have to wait their turn. But say that small beak, no, it's not a lappet face. That small beak enables them to get into areas that other vultures cannot reach. They've also been seen sort of picking through predator scat as well, looking for little morsels. Mark a plan. No, it's definitely not a lappet anyway. Looks like a whiteback. Not sure if they get Cape vulture up there as well, which is bigger than a whiteback vulture. Yeah, I think just a standard whiteback. Love the way they run around on the ground. Sometimes when they're fed heavily and they've got particularly full bellies, and their crops, which is that sort of storage unit in their throat, is so expanded, these vultures can get so heavy that they really struggle to take off, and they need a nice long runway, and you can see them. They have to sort of run, and they're flapping and flapping, and their wingtips are brushing against the grass, and then eventually they heave themselves up off the ground. An awful lot of energy being expended to do so. So a crop of a vulture is particularly large, as it is with many birds of prey. So the crop is that, say, sort of storage unit in their throat, where they can quickly gulp down lots and lots of food before it actually goes into the stomach, enabling them to avoid a bit of competition. Eat as quickly as possible, get as much in there, and then fly off with your full crop. Find a nice quiet spot. There'll be some enzymes and chemical digestion happening in the crop just to soften the food, and then that food can be digested with a little bit more peace. Warthog. Also potentially looking for scraps. Warthogs also been seen occasionally feeding on carrion and carcasses. But I think in this case, we're just coming in for some shade. These curious vultures. Is it dead? Can we eat it? It's very nice. Someone sent out a takeaway. Bill Myrtle Beach, you're right. Yeah, the birds so amazing to find their food sources for something so small. Of course, one of the most famous is the turkey vulture in the States that has one of the best olfactory capabilities of all creatures in the animal kingdom. It has an amazing sense of smell that can smell carrion from miles and miles and miles away. And strange of all the little trees that are producing some shade, it seems strange that the warthogs have chosen this. I don't think they're going to get very restful sleep here. And going back to that bird digestion, so you've got the crop, and then they have kind of a two-phase stomach. The first part of the stomach is called the proventriculus, and it's within that stomach that the first part of sort of bacterial fermentation and the enzymatic, if that's a word, chemical breakdown of the food occurs. And then it passes through into the gizzard, which is a special sort of intestinal or stomach. It doesn't have teeth because teeth are very, very heavy. Dentine and enamel are heavy substances, and being a bird is all about saving weight for the economy of flight. So, any teeth, and they've sort of redeveloped their teeth in their stomachs. So, the gizzard is a muscular stomach that's usually lined with these rather solid ridges, and it creates these muscular contractions, which helps to break down that food into far more easily digestible parts within the intestines. And the structure of the gizzard will change depending on the diet of those animals. So actually, the gizzard of a vulture, I'm not too sure about, but generally the things like eagles won't have a particularly um, sclerotized gizzard, if that's the correct word, not a particularly ridged gizzard, because meat is relatively soft. But those birds that do eat things like seeds, which are a little bit harder to digest, will have a lot more ability to crush within that stomach. The reason I sort of question myself with vultures, of course, is they will be eating pieces of bone as well, and that will require getting broken up. And then you do get some species, particularly ducks, is a very good example. They will eat little bits of grit and stone, and in the gizzards, chickens as well. And that just acts again like this sort of attritional ability to be able to really sort of grind up that food in the stomach, those makeshift teeth. Lots and lots of vultures arriving. Suggestions maybe that it might be feeding time soon at the vulture restaurant. Birds learn patterns just like many other animals. So I wouldn't be surprised if we do get some restocking of the restaurant at some point, looking at the way all the birds are congregating. Possibly that's why the warthogs are here, you never know. But going back to your comment there, Bill, from Myrtle Beach, so that excellent eyesight, also very important in the procurement of food. And you'll find certain birds are more sensitive to certain wavelengths of light. given off by ripe fruits, for example, as opposed to unripened fruits. Obviously, that's a sort of a mutual evolutionary trait that seed dispersers and seeds have developed over the years to ensure those seeds are removed from the parent plant. And so also a lot of flowers as well that produce nectar. I find that birds are often attracted to reddish coloured flowers as opposed to the insects. Insects generally go for white, yellow, and blue flowers, and the majority of red flowers are pollinated by birds. So the colour of the food source also picked up by the birds with that particular ability to see very, very well. And of course, birds have 4 visual cells in their retinas. So as we only have 3, the red, the green, and the blue, birds or many bird species also have an ultraviolet receptor as well. So we see that in predators, which enables them to see things like urine trails from rodents. And then certain flowers and things have also got these sort of landing lines that are only visible under UV light that just attract pollinators to them. Insects as well will make use of that, seeing in ultraviolet light. Catherine, I'm glad you're enjoying the sky view. Yeah, we've had it on the last couple of days. It's nice to see. It's got an incredible zoom function, this camera as well. We were looking at a crocodile in that distant dam a little bit earlier, or yesterday, sorry. Yeah. So indeed, that is why the birds were congregating. So again, you could argue the merits of should we be feeding wild animals, but in the case of vultures, where they are becoming critically endangered in places, very, very important to help these species that we as humans have persecuted. Look at the chaos of the mayhem. Yeah, warthogs also getting involved. And it is absolutely amazing how quickly a wake of vultures like this, the collective term, can dispose of meat. I've seen entire animals that have been completely picked clean in the space of 5 or 6 hours, nothing left. Reminds me of winged termites, those sort of alate eruptions. The marabou storks trying their best to get in there, but it's very difficult to get into that great scrum of vultures. A lot of sharp beaks being waved around in there. It's just like a Roman phalanx of a battalion moving together as one. Oh, the storks grabbed something. No, missed. very difficult to know where to look. There's so much visual stimulation, so much movement. Every time I try and focus on one area, I get distracted by something else happening. But already you can see the chaos has subsided. It really doesn't take long for that meat to get passed out between everybody. So, as we were saying, this is the benefit of having a crop, a little storage unit in your throat. You can eat very, very quickly, wolf down great big chunks of meat, and then go and find a quiet spot and digest in peace. And yeah, interesting to see the warthogs there. I'm not obviously not quite sure what it is that they are feeding on specifically. But various, I've never seen a warthog feeding on a carcass, but various cases of it has been reported, particularly seen on trap cams and things, bush pigs as well. But again, animals are adaptable and they've learnt that there is a regular food supply here, so why not? Protein rich, generally not considered a carnivore, certainly a warthog, but pigs do pretty much eat anything. Of course, they are in that same family. And nobody wants to turn down a free meal. These great gatherings of vultures, of course, are one of the biggest problems that they have faced of late. This sort of vile behaviour, and there is no better word for it than vile behaviour of those rhino poaching incidents, where poachers have purposely poisoned rhino carcasses with the express intention of poisoning vultures so that they don't give away the position of a carcass, allowing the poachers more time to escape undetected. And it's absolutely horrific to think that an entire species is being pushed to the brink of extinction due to mankind's, well, greed, for want of a better word, and utter disregard of the natural world. I think it's one of the great failings of our species, particularly of late. You hear all about the rhino poaching, and it's terrible, but the knock-on effect that this poaching epidemic has had on other species is nothing short of disgusting. Oh, we've got some mating going on in the background. Catherine, you saying that we have seen warthogs eating an impala at some point, possibly in Madikwe? Well, yes, it definitely does happen. It's not something that I've ever witnessed, but as I said, very, very well documented. Not unusual, just rarely seen. Once that feeding time is over, a mass exodus. Very cool to be able to view these birds from above, looking down on them as well. I have a great memory of being up at, there's a beautiful lodge right up in the north of Kruger in the Pafuri region called the Outpost, and their rooms are basically stuck on the side of a massive cliff overlooking the Lavuvu Valley. So from your room, you can look down probably, I would think it must be a good 150, 200 meters down to the valley floor. When I was up there once, I was lucky enough to see a peregrine falcon fly underneath me. I was above the peregrine falcon. That was quite a powerful experience to see such an impressive bird looking down on it in flight. Crocodile probably thinking, why does nobody feed me? Also, another animal that exhibits that uni-hemisphere sleep, sleeping with one eye open, one half of the brain sleeping, constantly on the lookout for an opportunity to feed. And so they will also estivate in very dry conditions. Sometimes, if all the water dries up, it's not impossible to bump into a crocodile fast asleep under a tree in that sort of state of reduced activity. And it is possible to get very, very close to it because it is not sleeping. It is in a different metabolic state. There are photographs of rather silly people who get very, very close to them and have photos taken with them. Highly, sorry, everybody. I've just realised I was muted. I don't know how long I was muted for. I was having a lovely conversation with myself about crocodiles and the way that they sleep, also with one half of the brain um, inactive and the other half not so, and the way that they can also go into this sort of estivative state in very, very hot and dry conditions. But Harry asked how often do crocs need to eat? Very much depends on what they've eaten and how much food they've got in their stomachs. So those classic big crocodiles that you see up in the Mara River that take out wildebeest and zebra on the crossings, they can, if after a big meal like that, they can go 6 months, maybe even 8 months without having to feed again. So very much dictated by what they've eaten and how much food they get in their stomachs. Remember, they have a very slow metabolism, so they digest their food slowly and they can survive due to those great periods of inactivity. Well, that was very interesting to watch. A bit of a feeding frenzy of vultures. From we've gone from South Africa to Zimbabwe. Let's go from Zimbabwe further north up into Kenya and visit Oldonyo waterhole. Hello, big boy. There's Merrick just watching that trunk. It reminds me, I don't know if any of you have ever seen that rather cult classic movie called Tremors. One of my favourite movies growing up, and I still watch it occasionally. It always makes me chuckle. It's sort of a B-list monster movie, if you like, with these great underground worms in a desert somewhere in the drier parts of America. But that's what the elephant trunk always reminds me of. Cool. Seems we had a little bit of a feed issue there with the audio, but this is not a bad way to make up for that. Loads of elephants at Ukakoyo in Namibia. We are doing a full round trip of the African continent today, northwest, south, and east. Speaking of random little pub facts tidbit, and I doubt it's actually true, but there are suggestions that the word news comes from the fact that it's an acronym for North, East, West, and South, as it's information from all over the globe. I don't know if that's actually true, but it's one of those ones that you do hear. Of course, very, very dry this time of year up in Etosha. We will be seeing more and more elephants as they're coming into this area, as they remember these artificial water sources that are so important to them during the dry season. Of course, no danger of crocodiles out in Namibia. So these elephants are quite happy wading out into the water, even the young ones. Very much a classic elephant pool party. Everything somewhat being disturbed by this big bull who's just come in. Caused a bit of chaos. I wonder if he's in must or if he's just flexing some muscles. Yeah, looks like some temporal gland secretions. Their body language, head held high. See where the smaller elephants have all got out of his way, particularly the young males. Those youngsters all having their trunks up, just getting a whiff. These interesting new pheromones and smells. You can see that family at the back has decided this is far too stressful. We're going to leave. Very important, of course, for a musting elephant to drink due to those temporal secretions and the urine that is dripped during the time that he's in must. It does lose an awful lot of fluid throughout the day. 20, 30, 40 litres perhaps of hydration disappearing on a daily basis. So very important to keep well hydrated. He's very much upset the apple cart at this waterhole. See, the majority of the elephants have all decided to get away from him a little bit. Time for a dust bath. And this young male on the right, rather sort of sheepingly approaching the waterhole, keeps getting an evil eye from this musting bull. I wonder if he's going to go and flex his muscles. He's turned his back. This one thought, nope, I'll quickly come down and have a drink. So you can see the way that that young bull, we can see his penis extending under his body, that sort of submissive behavior. He's a little unsure of how to act as well on the right. We saw a sort of the cocking of the leg and the swinging of the foot. It's another sort of the sign we look for an unsure elephant, but no tail cocked out yet, which would be the sign of a sort of a stressed, anxious elephant. I think more curious than anything else, showing some curious respect or respectful curiosity. I think I prefer respectful curiosity. Shame for what was probably close to 100 elephants. This male has walked into the fray and pretty much cleared everybody away except for some of the young males now. I know how you feel, buddy. Walk into a bar and everybody leaves. This youngster looks like he wants to approach. There'll be some say, interesting smells and the whole learning process of bachelor herds of elephants. You see, we're pretty much left now with only the boys. And if he tolerates another one approaching him, he'll probably see the young one's trunk extending up to the mouth, just getting a little bit of a whiff. Definitely showing some respect. Although the big bull seems to have relaxed now. He's got his back turned to him. He's not too fussed. Brave little springbok. Of course, it's quite possible that this bull has relaxed a little bit now because the majority of the females have all disappeared. There's no point showing off quite as much as he might have felt it necessary to do a few minutes ago, since he's cleared everybody out. So possibly another breeding herd coming in here. Yeah, so his other breeding herd has come in and he's going to wander over and have a look, check for any reproductive opportunities. Should probably see him have a sniff. Little Myrtle Beach. It is not easy for an elephant to walk over all those rocks, but you'll be amazed how accurate they are in their foot placements. They will purposely not stand on any of the particularly large, sharp rocks. Um, the rest of them, don't forget that foot is so spongy, that big sort of cartilaginous pad underneath the toes, which are sort of very much at an angle, sort of walking on their tiptoes almost. So that big spongy foot will absorb a lot of those, but sharp rocks, elephants definitely don't like. And that's a tactic that we use in A, conservation, and B, also sort of preservation to some extent. In reserves, I know of reserves where they're trying to protect the big old mature trees from being pushed over by elephants. So they've put sort of concentric circles of big rocks in the ground sticking upwards. That attracts the elephants. They have to be quite wide though, because they do have a very large stride span, elephants. And often a technique that's employed around what we would call JoJo tanks, so water reserves on reserves as well, the big plastic water containers. Elephants well known for attacking those in dry periods, ripping out pipes to get to that water. So one of the most effective ways to deal with it is to put sort of or sink rocks into the ground to make it uncomfortable footing for an elephant. There are lots of other theories as well, using oil and chili powder. I've tried certainly the chili powder route before when I was working at eco training. I had a water pipe connection very close to my tent, and night after night the elephants would come and rip it apart. We tried everything. Yeah, chili powder and all the sort of traditional remedies, as it were. Nothing seemed to work. We'd never got around to putting great big rocks around it because it was right next to the road and we wouldn't have been able to get out. It seemed our musty boy has grown tired of this game now. He's going to wander off. Taking the same path the other females, picking up on any pheromone cues. These young males, someone's going to chase this poor little springbok. Some nice little interactions there with all those Ellies. I think we're going to head back over to the Timbavati to King's Camp. All what a beautiful waterbuck bull. Slightly strangely shaped horns. We expect them to be a little bit more sort of swept back. These are quite straight for a waterbuck, but lovely to see all those ridgings. Got a nice idea for today. Stand in the cool water, a little bit of shade. So looking a little bit sleepy, those droopy ears, looking somewhat like Yoda. Strange mark on the side of his, sort of on his flank there around his shoulder. Don't know if that's just a little bit of mud or is it just shadow? Is it an injury? Looks like it looks like a little bit wet there on his left flank. You can really see that shaggy fur. He's nice and close as well. Very unique, well not unique, but very different amongst African antelope. Most of them, of course, have very fine, shiny hair, probably as an adaptation to the heat. But waterbucks, they do like to be close to water, generally in low-lying areas, does get a little bit cooler, so possibly to counteract that, particularly in these cold winter months. There's definitely something on his shoulder there. It'd be nice if he turned slightly to his right. I'm interested to see what that is. Whether it's sort of say, from an injury, sort of a congealed injury, or whether he just got a splash from something. Sometimes they do get very, very sweaty. That's one of the downsides of having a thick coat. They do lose an awful lot of water, 20 or 30 liters a day, apparently, they can lose under extreme stress in hot temperatures. One of the reasons that they are usually found near water, but also considered an ecotone species, so found on the boundary lines of um, well, I wouldn't say biomes, but sort of those sort of boundaries between woodland and grassland, which you'll often find seep lines and naturally occurring pans in those areas. So the bases of the slope, what we call the soil katina. So all that runoff water begins to flow down towards the valley, and when it comes to a flatter area, it all sort of runs off onto the surface. Makes it very difficult for and particularly in the low felt, we get a lot of sodium deposits there because there's a lot of sodium in the granite rock, which forms the bedrock for a lot of the substrate around here. And then you end up with those sites, usually just lower than the seep line, characterized by those very sort of barren open areas. It's very difficult for things to grow because that salt creates sort of a crust on the surface of the soil, makes it harder for seeds to get a grip in there to plant themselves, and also harder for little shoots to penetrate through. And any little shoots that do manage to get through, that's nice with the reflection. Any shoots that do manage to get through are nice and rich in salts. We know animals need salts just like we do, and they're often hoovered up by impala, particularly, that can get very, very close to the ground. So, not often that you find much vegetation growing on a sodic site. With the exception of magic guarries, the Eucula divinorum, they're what we call halophytes, enjoy salty soils. Just noticed there's a couple of terrapins on the right hand side. You can see they're sticking up, trying to warm up on this from this cooler water. I thought it was just a little sort of general flotsam to begin with. Definitely a little group of terrapins, likely to be serrated hinged terrapins. See, Natalie, you've asked which antelope usually has the longest horns. In terms of sort of true length, then the winner is going to be the greater kudu. They can have horns, but remember they are spiral. So if you could straighten out those horns, they would be the longest of all of them. They can be in excess of 2 meters at least if you were to straighten them out. Um, Other antelope species we have that have particularly long horns would be the sables. And in terms of probably which one grows furthest away from the body, if it wasn't the kudu, I'd think maybe a gemsbok, the oryx. Also have those long sort of scimitar type horns, but sable horns in big bulls, very prized bulls as well for that matter. They all get very long in the way that they're swept back over their shoulders and their spines. But yeah, the record for the longest horn, certainly out here, will be from a kudu. And stretching their necks up to the sky, probably to increase surface area and warm up. I always found it very, very difficult to tell the two terrapin species apart that we get in the low felt. We have the serrated hinged and we have the marsh terrapins. There are little differences around the head, and I honestly can't remember them off the top of my head, but the serrated hinged terrapin, as the name suggests, has a little sort of join close to the front legs where uh, the, the, the the carapace, the shell can actually sort of close in on itself. I'm not seeing that here. And you can also see it has quite a flattened carapace as well, the top of that shell. It's not particularly domed, which is another feature of a marsh terrapin as well. So I might be more inclined to imagine that these are marsh terrapins. They're more often seen during the summer months than the winter, but yeah, it's quite difficult to tell the two apart. So I've tried repeatedly. Say there are little subtle differences, but it's been a while since I've looked at it. Little heads popping up, very characteristic of waterholes around Africa. I'm surprised that they're not potentially interested in the waterbuck. Like I say, they are carnivorous. They eat a lot of aquatic insects, and one of the other things that they enjoy is ticks. So they're sort of the oxpeckers of the fresh water. And you'll often see when, say, a herd of buffaloes comes down to drink, all the terrapins will congregate, pick off the ticks that are around the sort of the hoof line of the animals or on the lower legs, maybe even up to the belly and the armpit area if the buffaloes come in deep enough. So no, I'm not sure why that they wouldn't think of doing the same for a waterbuck. I'm not actually sure of the tick load of a waterbuck. You would think with that long fur that they should have a lot of ticks, but of course the waterbuck's fur we know also gives off that sort of oily secretion, which amongst various things, including allowing them to move through the water more effectively with that long fur, it does act as a natural insect repellent. So, whilst I couldn't give you any specific figures of tick loads of waterbuck, I wouldn't be surprised if they have less than some other antelopes. Maybe that's another reason why they're not interested. A, perhaps they don't have as many ticks, and B, possibly that oily secretion is going to deter the terrapins as well. Raymond, I think in terrapins, generally speaking, it's a bit like birds of prey, and in many arthropod species, the female is generally bigger than the male. Possibly because of that requirement of being egg producing and needing a little bit more space in the body. I stand to be corrected. I'm not too sure of the sexual dimorphism specifically in terrapins, but if I had to hazard a guess, I would say that the females are generally bigger than the males. Of course, nowhere is that more evident than within spiders, particularly those golden orb web spiders, the banded legged Nephila, enormous dimorphism difference. And the females can be like 80, 100 times bigger than the males and weigh hundreds of times more. So you won't find any of those this time of year. We tend to get sort of eruptions of them around the early summer. Okay, so when you're enjoying those floppy ears, it's very sort of unwaterbuck-like, really. They're normally sort of standing a little bit higher than that, picking up information. But say this waterbuck is obviously enjoying a little bit of shade and some quiet time. Although it looks like being harassed by flies at the moment, signaling to somebody, channeling his inner Dumbo. Yeah, well, from our sleepy waterbuck, I think we're going to head over to Juma Dam, see what's going on that side. Oh, African Harrier Hawk is back. Fantastic. We had a brief glimpse of him a couple of days ago, or her. Definitely some hunting behavior being shown here, scrambling around. Maybe there must be a hole nesting bird in there. Starlings. I know the grey-headed parrots, brown-headed parrots sometimes nest in that tree there. Classic hunting behavior, clambering around, using those wings as balance. You can see those long legs that are going to potentially reach into holes in trees to try and pull out any unsuspecting chicks. One of my favourite birds, these. Checking all angles. The agility of these birds is incredible. I'm trying to think where I was. It was somewhere in Greater Kruger. I watched one attacking a colony of weaver nests, and just the way it was hanging upside down. There's definitely some sort of foraging behaviour to begin with. He looks like he's definitely having a good look around, but I thought if there was an obvious nesting hole there, he would be far more active. Bill Myrtle Beach saying that there's a bearded woodpecker in one of these trees. Or hoping that the Junajine, or the African harrier hawk as it's now known, doesn't go after it. I agree, but it's always that horrible debate, isn't it? We don't want the little chicks to be harmed, but we also don't want the African harrier hawk to starve. Maybe you mean that hole there. You can see a very obvious hole on that big trunk right in the middle of shot. Maybe that's the one you mean, Bill, with the bearded woodpecker hole. Another one just underneath it as well. Amazing the way they can clamber around. Of course, razor sharp little claws on the end of their tarsi there allow them to grip, particularly on a tree like this. Looks like an old knobthorn, which has that very sort of ridged, fissured bark. Gives lots of good spots of purchase. And hide and seek behind the trunk. Lenny, it is a very cool bird. It's one of my favourites. Just say its antics when it's clambering around the tree are really interesting to watch. And as we were discussing, I forget if it was yesterday or the day before, but that exposed skin on the face is really interesting as well. It's normally a yellow color, and then it turns reddish under times of sort of, I would say, stress or just interaction or heightened emotion. So, from a breeding perspective, or if it becomes stressed or excited about something, and I've seen it happen. It only takes a matter of 10 seconds or so to go from bright yellow to bright red. I actually thought when we first came to the camera that it was looking quite yellow, and by the time we zoomed in a little bit closer, it already looked a bit. Oh, have you got something? There's a bit of fluttering going on there. It looks a little bit redder. I wonder if the excitement of the hunt, the anticipation of the hunt, had caused that face to become a bit more flushed. A very specialist hunter, sticking those long, skinny legs into holes in trees, into crevices in rocks. Go after chicks, after lizards. very scaly legs as well, if we could go in a little closer. Bill Myrtle Beach, you're back with your excellent Jumacam knowledge, saying it's the lower of those two holes that we were looking at before, that people have been watching that bearded woodpecker hammer out that hole over the last few weeks. Thankfully, the harrier hawk doesn't seem too interested in heading in that direction yet. Interestingly, not being harassed by any parent yet. You do get to witness some very amusing mobbing behaviour from time to time with birds, particularly the very famous fork-tailed drongo. I've literally seen a drongo sitting on the head of a, what's it? I think it was a brown snake eagle. Sitting on the head, just sort of pecking at it, basically. And the snake eagle's just like, oh, really? I can't be bothered. You're irritating, but I've got no energy for this. But those little drongos will take on all sorts. Martial eagles, no problem. Dive bomb them, harass them. See that characteristic white bar on the tail. Good identification feature in flight. I'm sure they'll also go for little squirrels as well if they find an active squirrel hole. Now, there was a fleeting glimpse of a drongo. Let's see if the drongo decides to come in and harass. It doesn't look like it at the moment. But a beautiful bird. Juveniles much more sort of brown in colour. Again, those long legs will give it away, and that sort of distinctive shaped head. A lot of barring on the chest of the juveniles as well. Quite a distinctive call. I believe, it's the call of a harrier hawk. Haven't heard one for a while. See if the pseudo memory kicked in nicely there. I thought it might have disappeared, but no, it's still having a look around the street. Checking all those little nooks and crannies. Really giving this whole, well, these two trees are all going over. You'd think if there was something to be had, it would have found it by now, and seems to have avoided these two woodpecker holes. So, not that we wish ill to those little woodpeckers at all, but it would be very interesting to see him actually try and stick his legs into one of those holes. There's that sort of, I say knee joint, it's actually the wrist joint, what looks like the bird's knee, just because the structure of their feet is, for want of a better word, double jointed. It can bend in both directions. Just another one of those very clever adaptations, allowing it to get deep into holes at strange, weird, and wonderful angles. Very specialized bird. So many people, myself included, originally learnt this bird as the gymnogene, now more commonly known as the African harrier hawk. Gymnogene actually comes from the Latin and means bare-chinned or bare-cheeked, referring to that area of the face that we've discussed that flushes and changes colour under emotional states. Oh, interesting that the drongos are not really bothered. Maybe they don't perceive the gymnogene as a threat, particularly as they are nesting birds. They actually produce lovely little nests. They like sling hammocks between two branches as opposed to making a classic cup nest. But if this was an eagle, I have no doubt the drongos would be having their 2 cents worth. Little Myrtle Beach, I know you're worried about that woodpecker, but say, thus far, He doesn't seem to have shown any interest, or not that we've seen at least, in those two holes. Little woodpeckers, all the best. Lenny, I'm glad you've enjoyed our chats today. As always, there have been some interesting things to look at. So particularly interesting to watch that big musting bull come in and cause chaos at Kikuyu. Okay, well, that was very nice to see. Very happy we got such a good look at that harrier hawk. Let's head back over to Madikwe to Jamala for the first time today. And some more ellies. I like this dam, so I've had some great sightings of elephants at this dam over the last few months. I rather like that little island in the middle. It makes me want to hop across that single rock and just sit on the middle of that island and watch the world go by. It's like you want to have a drink, but it's got no space. Mum's chosen a rather awkward place to have her drink. I'll try the other side. Nope, no luck there either. Let's get a sense she's blocking the little one off. Leave me alone. This is my time. I can't quite see what's going on there, but I like to think she's a good mum. She's just backed up to allow access to that mammary gland. Sure, that little one's having a drink. No, maybe not. Just a little bit of FOMO. Wants to see what's happening. Well, thank you, Bill Myrtle Beach. I'm glad you have also enjoyed our chats today. It's always a pleasure to share my musings with you all and to hear questions and comments. It is so nice when you guys do send in things, gets the old grey matter whirring, as I like to say. And so it often gives me a bit of an impetus to go and read up on some things. It's quite complicated sleep in animals since we sort of started our chat with that this morning. I watched like a lecture, a live lecture on YouTube earlier this morning about the different types of sleep states in animals and EEG monitorings and things. It's all very complex, but very interesting. The whole concept of sleep, it's still not something that we understand particularly well. Just little stuff like that and questions that you guys ask that make us go out and do some research because it's very difficult to sometimes know what to read about. I like to try and do a little bit of prep work before these, so we've got something to discuss as a group. But it's hard to know what to research sometimes. So your guys' questions help just sort of focus the mind a little bit more. So we are almost out of time. I'm sure I'll be back at some point in July doing some more live at the waterhole shows. I need to figure out my calendar. Relatively busy at the moment. It's peak astronomical season for me as well. Busy tomorrow night with another evening, so let's cross fingers for the weather. But say, do stay tuned for our afternoon safaris. They will be coming soon, but we are pretty much out of time now. So I hope you've enjoyed today. We've had some interesting things as always. So particularly enjoyed that musting bull elephant, and lovely to spend some time with that African harrier hawk. But I hope you've all enjoyed it. And don't forget to join again tomorrow, 12:30 until 2:30 Central African time. But from me, goodbye and have a wonderful day.